Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Digital Thinker Academy webinar on mastering RFQs in Hexagon EAM. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Rebecca Schofstall, and I will be facilitating today's session. I know that today is a holiday for some folks, but we will be recording this webinar and posting it to our YouTube channel after today's session. Just wanted to kick things off and share some information regarding Digital Thinker. If this is your first time attending a session, basically our DTI Academy, we provide learning opportunities for Hexagon EAM. I just put a link in the meeting chat if you want to get to know us better. A couple of things to point out. If you're interested in the upcoming schedule, you can click this link here for DTI Academy. We have a couple of webinars hosted by members of the Digital Thinker team in July. And in August, we are offering a couple of workshops on Overview 360. So very excited about what we have in the schedule that's coming up. Also, you can find a link to learn more about the Streamline conference that's happening in February of 2026. And after this session, you can access the recording. We usually can get it up within a day or two, but it will be available on our YouTube channel. So definitely bookmark the link. Feel free to subscribe. We post regularly, so we're happy to have you join the EAM community. Is everyone able to hear me? If you could just, okay, great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Perfect. Thanks, everybody. All right, so after that little introduction, we'll just go ahead and dive in to today's content. So if you're like me, you've seen screens in the menus in EAM referencing RFQs and quotations, but not entirely sure how that may fit within your workflow. Okay. So there's a couple, I'm just going to pause a moment. There's still a couple of folks that can't hear. We'll take a look here. Nicholas, can you hear now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Glad to hear. All right, so yeah, so today, like I said, you may have heard about this feature in EAM. You may be using it currently outside of EAM. You may have your own internal processes. So today, I just wanted to introduce you to RFQs in EAM. We're going to be reviewing kind of what the process could look like in EAM, the status flow for the RFQs, as well. I'll be demonstrating an example to give you an idea of how you can integrate RFQs into your workflow. I will be keeping an eye on the meeting chat, so feel free to post any questions in the meeting chat. If I don't get to it right away, I'll have time at the end of the session to answer any questions that were missed. Wonderful. So let's just start with RFQs, and just for a baseline for everyone, what is an RFQ? Well, RFQ stands for Request for Quotation. And the purpose of an RFQ is to gather pricing and even delivery information from vendors or from your suppliers for comparison. Typically, this is going to include product and service specifications, the quantities that you're looking to procure, delivery requirements, and sometimes contract terms. Typically, we see RFQs used when the requirements are clear, they're well defined, and essentially the main decision factor is price. That's not always the case, but typically, it's when, we have that specific information and we're going to send out the request for quotation to multiple suppliers and make our decision with that determining factor typically being price or whether or not they can fulfill it when we need the items or services, to be delivered or be performed. So we'll just talk through a quick use case. Essentially the first step would, and we can talk about stock. When I do the demo, I'll be able to show you a service line as well. But let's say, you are an EAM user, you're generating requisitions for low stock. Well, that low stock is detected. So whether or not you have, the low inventory for essential components, say for upcoming production, or it's part of your standard reordering process, we identify the need to replenish stock. So step 2 would be the RFQ creation. In EAM, you can create an RFQ from a requisition. It's not required. It does not have to be tied to a requisition nor to a work order, but the procurement manager would prepare an RFQ. So that would include the item, so the specifications, the material, the size, the quantity. It would include the required delivery dates, any requirements in terms of packaging or delivery, any payment terms, and so forth. And then once that RFQ is created, it's sent to the suppliers. So it could be sent, maybe via email. Perhaps you have another procurement software or supplier portal where that RFQ is being distributed to the various suppliers that are designated. Once it's sent to suppliers, typically you have a response date on there. And so then you start receiving the supplier responses where they would provide the price per unit. If there's a lead time, maybe they say that there's a minimum order quantity, the shipping terms. Maybe they can't even fulfill it, okay? Or it could just be something that they could partially fulfill. That would be indicated on the quotation as well. After that, we go through a process of evaluation and approval. So the procurement team would evaluate, which is most cost effective, perhaps the historical relationship with the supplier and their ability to fulfill on time, perhaps quality and compliance, and delivery timelines would be included in that evaluation process. Once the quotation is approved, okay, then you're going to award the items to the various suppliers, and then you can proceed with generating and issuing the purchase order. And at that point in time, essentially, you're going to wait for the delivery, for the goods to be delivered and inspected. And then after that, you would proceed with the invoice and payment. So if we move on to the next slide, okay, let's just pause for a moment after just getting an idea of what the process is why would we want to use RFQs? Well, it can help with vendor selection. In EAM, it can help with tracking those quotation responses, tracking the RFQs. Are we still waiting for quotations to be received? Have all quotations been received? It can help us with making purchasing decisions where we're able to identify, well, this supplier can provide it at a lower price point per unit, but perhaps they're only able to fulfill a partial order. They can't provide the full quantity that's being requested. So it helps our purchasing team to gather the information and essentially evaluate which option is going to be the best for this particular, maybe it's a service or it could be a group of materials. So for our EAM users, okay, when we're thinking of this in terms of the EAM process, this is just an example, okay? This isn't how it has to be, okay? So the example that I will walk through today is that what we're going to have is a requisition, and that requisition is going to be flagged for requiring an RFQ. So from the requisition, we can generate the RFQ. Okay? We can complete the RFQ by adding the suppliers, making sure that the quantities are in place, all the materials and services are listed. Then that RFQ will be sent to the suppliers. And then what we'll do is we'll start receiving quotations. So the suppliers would send back their quotations, but based on our requests. And then from there, we'll be able to award the items and proceed with the procurement process in terms of aligning that with your current process of, are you using requisitions or would you start with the RFQ and generate the purchase order directly? Okay, and so forth. So what we'll do now is I will go ahead and demonstrate this process in EAM. So let me go ahead and switch my screen. And I am going to start today with our requisition. So I created a requisition as a starting point. And you will see here that there is a flag for RFQ required. This checkbox and the RFQ field can be made available via Screen Designer. Now, I manually selected the checkbox for this requisition that the RFQ is required. You could always have business processes or business rules in place, even create flex business rules to help facilitate that process if there are certain requirements that would require an RFQ. But in this example, I just manually selected RFQ required. Now, if that is selected, and I'll go ahead and just demonstrate this for you, the system will prevent you from approving a requisition because the system will recognize that it's required to have the RFQ, but one has not been generated yet. So natively, that check is in place. So this requisition I just created as an example. So we have a part line on there. We also have a service line. And you'll see that the requisitioner has requested materials for an engine overhaul. And you'll see the details are listed here. So the requisitioner would go through their standard process of adding the parts and services. This particular example is tied to a work order for an upcoming engine overhaul. Now, to generate the RFQ, since it is required in this case, there is a button that's available that you can make visible on the requisition screen, or you can have it where the user will right-click to select Generate RFQ. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and generate the RFQ, and you'll see that this pop-up message will appear. So if there are only certain lines that you want to add to the RFQ, you do have the ability, okay, to select them down below. You'll also notice that Populate Suppliers is selected. So here, what that's going to do is if I've referenced already a supplier on, say, a part line because it's tied to a supplier number that I had, I can select Populate Suppliers and the system will copy that information over to the RFQ. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click Generate. And I had a feeling that I might get this. I think, okay, let me go ahead and update. Sorry, I created this maybe a little too early in advance. So you'll see an error message, okay? Requested before must be greater than or equal to the current date. So when I was looking at the part lines just now, I did notice that I had those set to June 10th, okay, as you can see here. So since that has occurred in the past, then no supplier is going to be able to fulfill this RFQ, okay? So let me just go in and update that for us. So I'm just going to put it to June 30th. And I'll hop over to the services as well. And just to demonstrate the ability to populate the suppliers, okay, I'm going to go ahead and associate a supplier to this particular record. I'm just going to select an example here, because that will demonstrate how that checkbox will copy our supplier over to the RFQ. Okay, great. And the requisition doesn't have to be in the awaiting approval status to create the RFQ. It could be in the unfinished status. And when I generate the RFQ, let's see, we might get an error message here. What do we got? Okay, we'll give it a shot here to see if we get any errors this time. Yep, all good. And I just wanted to mention the status. Like I said, it could be unfinished, it could be awaiting approval, because when you generate the RFQ from the requisition, then the status will automatically update to quoting, and the relevant RFQ will populate in the corresponding field. That way, the users know that this is not just a stagnant requisition that's sitting out there, but it's actively part of the quoting process. Now, our requests for quotations. So these are available from purchasing, and then quotes and requests for quotations. So we'll take a few moments and just talk about the information that's on the RFQ. Okay. Since I generated this from the requisition, okay, the requisition field is going to be populated to reference the record. We could associate an RFQ to a work order or even a work order activity, but just keep in mind you do not have to associate it to a work order, requisition, project is an option as well. Just that field is hidden via Screen Designer. I've done this many a times where we're just creating the RFQ and it's yet to be associated with another record in EAM. Now, right now, the status is unfinished, okay? And I can update the requested response date. So if I want to give our suppliers, the ability to respond until, maybe it's 3 to 5 business days, you can update the requested response date. Okay? I'm shown as the requested by and the buyer in this case, but I can always update those. Okay, could select the delivery address. And then there are some RFQ terms that are available in the bottom right-hand corner. So if you wanted to say put in the payment terms or even the freight terms or shipping terms, payment method, and so forth, as long as the information is in EAM to support those terms, then you can make the selections on the RFQ. Now, the RFQ print options, okay? Basically, this controls the structure, let's say the format of the actual PDF. I will say that customers that I've worked with that are using RFQs, typically they have a custom RFQ report that they choose to use. But EAM does have a native RFQ report, and the individual lines, basically what that will do is it will list all of the lines, so all of the part and service lines for our RFQ. And then we have a couple of options about summing quantities. So I'll show you a quick example, okay? I don't want to derail us too far. What I would encourage you to do is kind of test it out and see which one you prefer. But this is an example of individual lines. And in this particular RFQ, I have 3 lines, 2 part lines, 1 service line, or I'm sorry, it ended up being 3 part lines on this one. And you'll see that even though, okay, I have this particular part listed twice, okay, the aluminum enclosure, because I had it listed as separate lines, because I had separate dates associated with when I needed them, okay, then the lines are shown individually on the RFQ. Whereas this is an example of, summing the quantities. And you'll see that the aluminum enclosure is just listed once for a total quantity of 40 versus listed separately for 20 each. Okay, that's going to be the main difference between those options, is whether or not any of the lines are summed or combined on the RFQ. And you can always select to auto print the RFQ. That will just generate the PDF when the status of the RFQ is changed to sent to supplier, which we'll see in just a few moments. Now, the email information that you see here, natively, the system is not going to do anything automatically in terms of sending an email notification. So there's no standard built-in functionality. But what these fields could help with is, let's say you do want to generate an email notification. You're probably going to need to use some flex, so some business rules to help support that. We can trigger it off of the status change, but you're going to want to pull in the supplier details, and that information is stored in a separate database table. But the email information fields that you see here on record view could be used as parameters in that email template to pull information directly from the RFQ that's being sent. But just know that there's no default kind of built-in functionality. You would need to leverage probably Flex and the email notification functionality in EAM to build those out. Okay, so you'll see a comments tab here. So that's standard in EAM if you wanted to add a comment or additional information for this RFQ. You'll also notice a clauses tab where you can associate clauses for this. So for instance, if I wanted to include a clause for the cost and the freight to the destination, so to my delivery address, you could always associate and add multiple clauses to your RFQ so that information is provided to the supplier. Now, I would probably, and I probably should have updated my tab order for my RFQ, because in my head, I would want to go to parts and then services and then suppliers. So you can always update the tab order. You can change the tabs that are always displayed, and that's set up on, for your various user groups. But for the parts, okay, we have part here. We have an engine overhaul kit. Okay, I have my due date that's listed. Okay, I put it as the 25th. If I want to include any additional information for this particular line, okay, I could add it here. And even if I wanted to add additional lines, so this is where it's going to come into play with, are you creating this from a requisition? Are you creating it before the requisition? Or maybe you have an RFQ and then you're generating the PO. Because it does change, okay, what you're able to do on the RFQ screen. If I was creating this RFQ and it wasn't tied to a requisition, then I could update that due date. Okay, but natively it's pulling from the due date from the requisition line. I could also add as many lines as I wanted, where here you're seeing that since I generated from the requisition, the only lines I'm able to bring over are those lines that were on my requisition. I can show you a quick example here. I'll come back to this one here in just a moment. Let's see here. Let me just unfinish this one. So you'll see that this particular example, it's not tied to a work order, it's not tied to a requisition nor project. So I have full flexibility to update the quantity being requested, the due date, adding any comments related to this request, and I have the ability to add additional lines. So just something to keep in mind, okay? Good to mention, just so you know kind of how the process is aligned. So I have my one part line. If I hop over to services, we also see that I have a service line. This copied over directly from my requisition. Okay, and we have the information listed here. Okay, so this is due on the 30th as well, pulled directly from the requisition line. Okay. So the next step in the process is, we've created the RFQ, but we need to designate the suppliers that the RFQ is going to be sent to. So on the suppliers tab, you'll see that I already have one. okay? That's because when I generated the RFQ from our requisition, I selected populate suppliers, and I had associated our overhaul kit with this particular supplier, okay? Otherwise, from here, you have the flexibility to select, as many suppliers as you want to seek quotations from. Okay. So I'm just going to select another supplier here. Okay, I could always put in my name. Like I said, natively, the system is not going to trigger any sort of email, but you can use these fields, okay, to help configure that and send parameters to the email notification in EAM. Okay, so we had a requisition, we generated the RFQ. Okay, we have an opportunity to review the RFQ, designate any of the terms or clauses, and then we select our suppliers. So right now our RFQ status is unfinished. The next step would be to update to ready to send. Okay. And basically what that's saying, okay, we have all the relevant information, we've designated our suppliers, it's ready to send to the supplier. Okay. So when the time comes to actually create the quotations for each supplier, that's when you'll want to change the status from ready to send to sent to supplier. And the great thing that happens, and it's creating my report right now, my RFQ, because I selected the checkbox to print it, and that will occur when the status is changed to sent to supplier. And so you see I have one here for Fastenal, and then I have another one here for Grainger. So it's going to generate the RFQ, one for each supplier that was indicated. Also, what happens is a quotation record is created for each supplier. And those quotations are available under Purchasing, Quotes, Quotations. And so I could filter this down based on my RFQ number, and you'll see that we have two listed. Okay? And that's based on, I had two suppliers associated with the RFQ. And it's on the quotation screen where you're going to be inputting, okay, the quotes that you receive back from the suppliers. Okay. So let's say, we received a quotation, from Fastenal. So I could put in the reply date, so it was today. If they requested a response by a specific date, okay, I could select the expiration date for this quotation. And then on the relevant lines, whether it's parts and services, this is where you can input, okay, the pricing information that was provided. So let's say this particular one here, I'm just gonna put in a random number here, $3,000, for the one engine overhaul kit. I'm requesting it by the 21st. I'm sorry, the 25th. Okay, they're able, okay, to provide it on the 23rd. Okay. The same would be true for the service lines. Okay, if they're able to fulfill the request for services, Okay, then I could enter in the pricing information for the services. Okay, and once again, if that delivery date was specified, I could populate it here. Okay, that's going to help with making decisions in terms of who to award the items to. Because if someone says that yes, they can provide it, but it's not going to be by that due date, okay, then you could, that could factor into your decision-making process. Okay. Now, I will touch on this not offered. I'm going to do that for our next supplier here. So let me just go ahead and save this. And if I've entered all of the information that I received from Fastenal for this, then I could go ahead and update the status of the quote to received. Now, what that does, I want to point this out, is on our RFQ, you'll see that right now it's sent to supplier. But if I refresh, it says receiving quotations, okay? That means at least one quotation has been received, okay? So if I hop back over to our quotations, then I could input the details for our second supplier. I do want to mention that it is possible to change the status manually. So when I receive our next quote, the system's going to automatically update the status to all quotations received. I can manually change the status, and what would happen is any of the quotations that have not been received will be canceled. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that if I were to manually change it to all quotes received, then our quotation for Granger would automatically be canceled. Okay. Okay, so I'll go ahead and enter in the information here. Okay, so let's say for this particular supplier, okay, maybe they're able to provide the overhaul kit, but for a lower price point. And they're able to, deliver it on our requested due date. But let's say for the services, they did not offer that on the quote that we received back. So that way you have the ability to mark it as not offered so that when we go to award, okay, the items in our RFQ, we would not be able to award our service line to Granger because they did not offer it. So then back on record view, I could then update this to received. And if I hop over to our RFQ, you'll see it's receiving quotations, okay? If I refresh, all quotations have been received, okay? So this is also where you want to think about, maybe how you could leverage, let's say, an inbox to help facilitate the RFQ process. So here I have an inbox for RFQs where all quotations have been received, so that I could, that's going to be a flag when I log into EAM, that, oh, okay, I need to go in and review those quotations and award the items to, keep the procurement process, moving along. Okay, so now that all of the quotations have been received, and I'll just show this here. Let me show you where we are here. Okay, our RFQ started unfinished, okay? Then it was ready to send, okay? Once we actually distribute the RFQ to the vendors or to the suppliers, okay, we would need to update it to sent to supplier. Receiving quotations, the system will automatically update that when, as long as one quotation's been received. If all quotations have been received, the system will update to all quotations received. That's our indication that we need to go in and award the items to the suppliers that we determine, okay? So this is going to happen on the selection tab. Now you'll want to see here, there are two radio buttons at the top, one for parts, one for services. So all of the lines on the RFQ, okay, are not going to be displayed. They're broken up by parts and services. So here, parts, if I toggle it to services, you'll see we only have one line. That's because Grainger did not offer the service for our engine overhaul. Okay. So be mindful of the radio buttons at the top. Also, you can create custom data spies. These are provided for you. So keep that in mind. By default, it's awarded and undecided items. If you wanted to, say, filter it by the earliest delivery date items, okay, or lowest line, okay, you can see here, the 28. I'd recommend, okay, if you're just getting started, just leaving it to the awarded and undecided items. That just ensures you're kind of are seeing the most relevant lines. Or, okay, you could always just default it to all items. That could be your default, and then you could always update it accordingly. Okay. So from here, this is where you're going to see some actions available. Okay. Award items is our way of saying, okay, we are going to award this item to, XYZ supplier. Cancel awarded items would allow us to kind of reverse that. Maybe we accidentally awarded an item to Fastenal, we didn't intend to. We can cancel it. All that does is it sets the line back to undecided. Okay, so don't worry if you accidentally award it. Okay, you can set it back to undecided. Update supplier catalog. Basically, you can update the supplier catalog in EAM with the values that you received from the quotation. And from here, you can generate requisition and generate POs. So this might give you an idea of how, the RFQ may fit within your procurement process. Okay. For us, we created the RFQ directly from the requisition. Okay. So we may decide, after the RFQ process has been fulfilled, we're just going to resume back to our standard process from the requisition. From there, our buyer creates the PO. Maybe, the buyer is handling kind of that transition, and they may generate the PO directly from the RFQ. And out here, you can also view totals for all suppliers. Okay. Which is kind of interesting here, right? Because it's going to give you a sum. So for instance, because the supplier provided, offered the part and the service, you see the total quotation value. This is very helpful, right? It's going to help you with evaluating it from kind of that cost perspective, all on this central screen. So what I could do, maybe I was basing this on, price, okay? Then I could come out here and I could select this line, okay? And then go to Actions, Award Items, okay? And the system will automatically update the status of the other line, okay, to not awarded. And then if I toggle this to services, okay, I could come out here and once again, award items. Okay. And I'll just show you, if I select this and do cancel awarded items, it doesn't cancel, okay, the selection, it just sets it back to undecided. Okay, so you can go back, okay, just in case if you made a mistake. Okay, now I can't award a partial line, okay? Let's say for instance, I had, oops, sorry about that, a part line and I had like 40 units. I can't award, okay, 20 to one supplier and 20 to the other. That would have to be represented as separate lines on the RFQ. Okay. So basically, when you're awarding items, you're selecting a supplier quotation line to fulfill the request. Okay. So if we hop back over to record view, okay, I can always calculate the cost. You see the awarded total section on record view, okay, just so I can get a gauge of the total RFQ value. Now the system will, will update this when we update the status to awarded closed, but I just like to preview it in advance so you can always manually calculate the cost. And after this, okay, our status, you will have to manually award it and close it. That way you're telling the system, yes, I've gone through, I've reviewed the supplier quotations, evaluated, made our decisions, and awarded the RFQ lines. Okay, so then you can update it to awarded closed. And what that will do is if I jump back over to our requisition, okay, you see it was quoting, and now it will update to fully quoted. Okay, so that would be a good example of perhaps having another inbox, okay, where folks can keep track of those requisitions that are fully quoted, because that's going to be an indication, to proceed with the procurement process for that particular requisition. Like I said, my example, okay, I generated it from a requisition. You don't have to. I could have started with my RFQ, and then from the RFQ, I could always come out here and generate requisition or generate PO. Okay. So here's the, once again, the RFQ status flow. Okay. I just wanted to highlight again those 3 RFQ print options. Like I said, you're probably going to want to customize an RFQ report, but the native report does provide these different options. I recommend starting with the individual lines because it avoids confusion, but you can sum the quantities by earliest due date or by due dates. I haven't created in this demo environment an RFQ with dozens and dozens of lines. So in my example, the sum quantities with earliest due date and by due dates look the same. But depending if you have an RFQ with many, many lines, that could change the view for the users as well. Okay. And yeah, so there is a question about showing update supplier catalog. So absolutely, let me show you that here. Okay, so this particular line was for our part 10029. So let me just bring that up on my screen as well. Okay, so you'll see here I have two suppliers associated with this part. Okay. And I really don't have any pricing information. Okay. So if I go back to my RFQ and I awarded it to supplier ending in 5, okay, and the price was $2,800. So if I go to Actions, Update Supplier Catalog, okay, I'm telling the system that I'm going to update the supplier catalog for this part to represent the information from the quotation that I received for $2,800. Okay. So if I hop back over to our part and refresh, you now see that our supplier is listed and we have the price from the quotation. Okay. So this particular example, I didn't have an existing supplier catalog record. If I did, it would just update the pricing information. But here it actually created the supplier catalog record. So great question. And I know we're kind of getting to the end of our time. A couple of things I do want to mention, keep in mind how you could leverage inboxes, email notifications, a couple of other things. So it is not possible to generate multiple RFQs from a single requisition. So depending on where you kind of insert the RFQ process in your procurement flow, just keep that in mind that you cannot have multiple RFQs tied to a single requisition. Okay. Also, keep in mind that records, can only be modified or summarized when the RFQ status is set to all quotations received. So if I wanted to go in and award the items, okay, then the RFQ needs to be all quotations received. And as we saw previously, there is a check in place where we can't approve a requisition if it requires an RFQ. There is a question about, does the RFQ currency limit the supplier that can be selected on the RFQ? I have not looked at that very closely. Let me see here. Let me take a look. I could take a look at that here. So, all right, my organization is USD. I believe that as long as we have those currency conversions in place, then it should not be a problem. Yep, that's fine. You would just want to make sure that you have those conversion rates in place for the currencies, but it does not limit which suppliers can be selected on the RFQ. Great questions. Well, I'll stick around. I have a few minutes left if you have additional questions. Otherwise, thank you for joining today. I hope you found it useful. Gives you an idea of, maybe you're currently using RFQs, can kind of evaluate how your process aligns with what I reviewed today, or maybe this is new to you and you're just curious and gathering information. Definitely reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. And like I said, let me put this link, I'll put it back in the meeting chat. I think it's just a handy way to get in contact with us, view the resources that we have available. And hopefully we'll see you back in July or August for one of the sessions that we have coming up. Thanks again, and definitely check out our YouTube channel. We'll be posting a recording within the next couple of days. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.